242 of the Organismo Andino de Salud, Convenio Hipólito Unanue. It is already 4 years of continuous interlearning since we started this webinar series in May 2020. This webinar is the first of a special webinar series to be held based on valuable collaboration with the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Today, Thursday, September the 12th, we will address the future of clinical trials in Latin America with the following agenda. Denmark, how a strong public-private partnership creates a robust clinical trial ecosystem. Danish clinical trial initiatives, the visions and perception of transplant and critical illness users. Clinical trials in the Andean countries, which include Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile, and Venezuela, take place in an epidemiological context characterized by a diversity of diseases and health conditions. This context is influenced by factors such as geography, cultural diversity, and inequalities in access to healthcare. Prevalent diseases include infectious diseases, respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases, and dengue fever are common in the region. In addition, tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS continue to be significant public health problems. Chronic diseases. There is an increase in the prevalence of non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular diseases, which are related to changes in lifestyles and urban development. And maternal and infant health. Maternal and infant mortality continues to be a challenge, especially in rural areas and indigenous communities. In summary, the epidemiological context for clinical trials in the Andean countries is complex and multifaceted, reflecting both local health needs and opportunities for research and development of new treatments. Attention to specific health needs of the region, along with collaboration and strengthening of the research infrastructure, are essential to advance the efficacy and relevance of clinical trials in these countries. Reflections on these and other priorities relevant to health and well-being can be found in the newsletter known as NotiSalud Andinas monthly edition, which is available on the website of the Andean Health Organization website and in the Andean Integration Knowledge Showcase. Next, we invite you to leave us your name, organization, and country from which you are joining us through the chat box of Facebook or YouTube Live. In this same space, you can leave your questions or send them via email, webinar@orascano@gmail.com. To access the certificate of attendance of this webinar, you must fill out a short survey and leave your data in the link that will be posted in the Facebook or YouTube live chats during this event. Please remember to check that your email is spelled correctly. This webinar has the following dynamics. We will start with the institutional reading, followed by the keynote speeches, and then start the dialogue based on the questions submitted by our participants. And today we will have two recognized professionals from Ecuador and Peru, from the National Health Institutes of those countries, who will make the relevant comments. We begin this important day by giving the floor to Dr. Marisela Malqui Osorio, Deputy Secretary of the Andean Health Organization. Go ahead, Dr. Marisela. Thank you, Lucho. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. It is a pleasure to extend a cordial greeting to all those present, from the Andean Ministries of Health to Dr. Boji Eliassen, Director of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, to Dr. Marianne Pilgaard and Dr. Peter Adel Nielsen, to Mr. Jorge Alameda, to Dr. Kirsten, distinguished speakers of this webinar. To our commentators, Dr. Domenica de Mora from INSPI of Ecuador and Dr. Lourdes Carrera from the National Health Institute of Peru, and to all the public that are joining us today. As Dr. Lucho mentioned, this event is being held in the framework of the agreement we have with STIFS that dates back to 2 years ago. We have held other events, and we are now beginning a webinar series that will be held on a monthly basis. On this occasion, we will talk about clinical trials, which are a type of research that are the cornerstone of studies applied to verify the efficacy and safety of new treatments, drugs, or vaccines prior to their approval and widespread use. Traditionally, these trials are or were divided into 4 main phases, each with specific objectives and methodologies, where human participants or groups of humans are prospectively assigned to one or more health interventions in order to assess their effects on health outcomes. The United States leads the list of countries with the most clinical trial studies in the world, followed jointly by European countries. However, there is an increase in Asian countries, which have been driven by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Latin American countries, there has also been a significant increase in these studies, with Brazil leading the list with 8,400 clinical trials, followed by Mexico with 2,588, and then Argentina with 2,088 studies by 2021. Even so, these studies account for only 5% of the world total. The Danish Phase 5 clinical trial or pharmacovigilance model seeks to innovate clinical trials through a digital and decentralized approach in order to improve the efficiency and accessibility of clinical trials, especially in regions such as Latin America, through the continuous evaluation of the safety and effectiveness of drugs once they have been approved. Tools such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, continuous monitoring, the management of different sources of information, and the active participation of patients are some of the great strengths of the model. The contribution of Horace Clonou to promote research knowledge in the Andean countries is based on the urgent need to have better diagnostic standards, to have a new regulation on clinical trials, adapting the new knowledge to promote the development of public policies, plans, and studies in the Andean area, supporting and encouraging international collaboration and disseminating knowledge in our Andean populations. Implementation in our countries requires coordinated efforts on several fronts, but the benefits for public health are invaluable, and we hope that this webinar will contribute to the development of these Phase 5 studies in the Andean region, and even more so to work together towards this achievement. At Orasconu, we have a saying, together we're stronger and together we go further. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. Marisela Malki, for the institutional message. We now are honored to have the presence of Dr. Boji Eliasson. He is the director of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. He will now give us his institutional message. Please go ahead.
Muchas gracias, Luis Francisco.
Thank you. Thank you.
Y muchas gracias a doctora María del Carmen.
Dr. Marisela, Mari Carmen for the invitation. Thank you for the time we have been collaborating with your organization, Orasconu. It is something very interesting with lots of potential in Latin America. And now, I would like to greet the authorities present today from the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies. It is a pleasure to share the health practices in Nordic countries. And it is also important to mention the importance of adopting some of these practices in Latin America, probably with a better format than in other countries. Today, we share clinical trials that have adopted a new dimension in Denmark, where we're using digital tools to improve the results and efficacy in the health outcomes. I am pleased to introduce two individuals who are working with me in Denmark, Marian, who is working with us, and she will present Denmark, how a strong public-private partnership creates a strong clinical trial ecosystem. She's the executive director of Trial Nation, Denmark. We have worked with her during several years. She will share with us this Trial Nation model, and she is very interested in sharing this model. Peter Adel, who works in my team with decentralized clinical trials known as Phase 5, and this is related to how we support patients in their homes and clinical trials without the patient having to think about leaving their homes. Also present today is my good friend, somebody I admire because of his efforts for the well-being of patients, Mr. Jorge Lamela, and he is also working towards facilitating access to clinical trials and trying to connect patients across Latin America. For all of us, dignity and the equality of patients is a fundamental value that needs to be reinforced. Also, that the future of clinical trials is different, where we work together with the different countries in different sectors, and where we use the power of digital tools and data. And now I would like to give you the floor, Luis Francisco, and thank you so much. It is an honor for me to start or restart this webinar series. Thank you, Dr. Boja, for your words and for the personal and professional commitment with the countries that are members of the Andean Health Organization, Dr. Marisela Malki and María del Carmen Calle. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Luis Francisco Vingolia Mori. I'm the coordinator of the thematic areas of the Orasconu. And after this moment, we would now begin with the moderator. I would like to greet Dr. Marianne Pilgard. She will begin the conference. As Dr. Borja said, the name of the presentation is Denmark, How a Strong Public-Private Partnership Creates a Strong Clinical Trial Ecosystem. Dr. Marianne Pilgard is Executive Director of Trial Nation, Denmark, and has more than 25 years of experience in life sciences, clinical development, business, and public-private partnerships. Welcome, Dr. Pilgard. Go ahead with your presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here today. And may I have yes, thank you very much. So I will give you a tour about how we in Denmark work together in a strong public-private collaboration and thereby build a strong clinical trial ecosystem. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I will give you an overview of Denmark, our healthcare, and how our health data is organized. I will give you an overview of how life science is a Danish political priority, and then I will speak about our organization, Trial Nation, and its role. So next slide, please. Next, please. So Denmark is a fairly small country, 5.9 million people, but in this small country, we have outstanding clinical competencies, and we are also very, very lucky to have extensive saturated longitudinal health data as well as social data. And already in 1968, we started having a unique 10-digit identifier linked to each individual, which follows you from cradle to grave. And we use this for instance, about 160 CPR-linked health registries. We have a CPR-linked electronic medical records system, and we also have a lot of other data, which I will come back to, which are linked on your CPR number. In addition to that, we also have a huge data bank on wet data. The last calculation was 30.6 million CPR-linked biosamples, and that's of course growing in our national biobank. Next slide, please. So the organization of healthcare in Denmark, it's on 3 different levels, but one important message is that we have tax-funded universal healthcare coverage. So this means that the whole population is covered under the same sort of overall system. The state covers the overall regulatory and supervisory functions in both health and elderly care. We are then divided into 5 regions, which provides hospital care, and that also includes emergency care, psychiatry, and healthcare services provided by general practitioners and also specialists in private practice. Then we have the municipalities who are responsible for a number of primary health and social services, for instance, elderly care. Next slide, please. So looking at data, we have health data that covers the entire population. We can also link it, as I mentioned, with the CPR number. We have a fully digitalized healthcare system. We have a structured process to access the data, and we can get real-time data. We also have a high degree of very detailed health data of high quality. And we also have a very strong public-private collaboration in life science. So next slide, please. So I mentioned that you can link data from cradle to grave. And this is an illustration of some of the information that you can get while you're born. We take blood tests from the umbilical cord. we also have blood tests from the heel of the newborn. Then you get visits from the health nurse. You have a vaccination program. You go to the GP if you need to. You go to the dentist. You get your medicine from the pharmacy. You have pregnancy and other life events. And then you cover throughout your life. And you also have the socioeconomic status, economics, and education and income. So you can do a lot of very interesting research on the data that we have. Next slide, please. Next, please. So life science is very important in Denmark. And looking at the share of exports from life science industry, it has actually risen from 5.5 to 19.7% in 14 years. And this is in the period 2008 to 2022. So coming from a small nation, this is, of course, very important, not only from a public health perspective, but also from an economical perspective. Next slide, please. And this strong interest with a very extensive cluster when it comes to life sciences, which is actually part of the largest cluster in the EU. It paves the way for strong policy prioritization. And in 2018, the first, at that time, called Growth Plan for Life Science was introduced. It's actually a life science plan. And this has been continued in an agreement on a strategy for life science. And on the right-hand side, you can see the presentation of the life science strategy covering not only 4 different ministries, but also the patient organizations. So this also signifies the involvement of the civic society and the importance of working together. Next slide, please. And next, please. Next, please. Yes. At my organization, Trial Nation, we do have a vision, and our vision is that we pave the way to a future where patients enjoy stronger, sustainable health, driven by fast access to cutting-edge medicine and medical technology, and where healthcare professionals save more lives and promote stronger health by always having state-of-the-art medical research and the latest discoveries right at their hand. And we really, really strongly believe that through clinical research, we create a better health and wealth for Denmark. Next slide, please. So how does this then pan out with regards to clinical trials? Well, actually, when you look at the number of clinical trials in Denmark per capita, Denmark is actually extremely strong and punches well above its weight. And we have seen a continuous growth over the years in number of clinical trials per capita. So this really is a testament to how we can work together. And I really love the saying that working together really takes you places and further. Because this is really a testament of the Danish way of working together in an ecosystem in a public-private collaboration way. Next slide, please. So Trial Nation is an association. We are a single entry to commercial clinical trials in Denmark, where we provide clinical infrastructure or access to clinical infrastructure. We are primarily publicly funded. Our services are free of charge, and we're a prioritized stakeholder in the Danish life science strategy, which focuses on public-private partnership in clinical trials and also favorable framework conditions for clinical trials. And in this sense, I'm talking about the operational framework conditions, make it easier to participate in clinical trials and making it easier to run clinical trials in Denmark. And we are established to make Denmark the preferred destination for commercial clinical trials. And as a side note, I find it quite interesting that this organization that we have in Trial Nation, it very much also aligns with the objectives of, for instance, the WHO, who really points out the importance of having national structures for clinical trials. Next slide, please. So in our organization, and I find that when I speak to colleagues from other countries, one of the things that makes the organization around Trial Nation quite unique is that we cover the state level through the Ministry of Industry, Business and Financial Affairs, as well as the Ministry of Interior and Health. We have all the hospital owners on board with the 5 regions. We also have life science industry members, and we also have the patient organizations, which are very strong in Denmark, and also the medical societies, meaning the researchers. So they constitute the board level of Trial Nation. And on the right-hand side in this picture, you see a secretariat, which, amongst others, coordinate clinical infrastructure, which is coordinated on a national level. But not only that, we also have colleagues on the left-hand side who are employed in the regions, meaning the hospital owners, and by the regions who have access to any area where we do not have a nationally or coordinated network. They know the researchers, and if there is a match need between a company and a clinical environment, they know exactly who would be a good person to talk to. Next slide, please. May I have next slide, please? Thank you. So just to make sure that everybody's a bit on their toes. In the previous slide, I showed on the right-hand side nationally coordinated clinical networks. These are showed on the left-hand side in this slide. So we have structures, for instance, within oncology, respiratory medicine, infectious diseases and immunomodulation, meaning vaccines, dermatology, psychiatry, children and adolescent medicines. So we cover quite a lot of the large areas where medicines and medical technology is developed. But as I mentioned, regardless of whatever you're interested in, we know who's the right researcher to talk to. So next slide, please. I also mentioned that one of the other aspects that we're working on is making sure that the framework conditions are favorable. And I mentioned that it's from an operational perspective. And in this slide, you see an example of one of the aspects which is typically quite time consuming. And perhaps not a favorite activity when you're a researcher and what you want to get going. And that is having a clinical trial agreement for the collaboration put in place. And here we have legal representatives from each region who together have decided on nationally approved templates. So for instance, if you are a pharma company or a medtech company, you have found your perfect collaboration partner for clinical trials, then you can actually take an agreement, and as long as you have agreed on the budgets, you can have the contract approved in just a matter of days. And of course, in the current world where everybody is extremely busy and time is of the essence, this is of great help. Next slide, please. So this is just to show that in TrialNation, we do have a lot of different intersections to all relevant stakeholders. You mentioned, you saw on one of the previous slides, our board composition, but also in the day-to-day work, we really facilitate contact between different organizations and work together on lifting the agenda of making clinical trials available for patients, making it easier for clinicians to run clinical trials, and also as a very small nation, making it known that Denmark is a good clinical trial destination. Next slide, please. I also mentioned, and in the introduction, it was mentioned digitalization, and you will hear a lot more in very much detail from Peter very shortly. But Denmark has very early on invested a lot in the digitalization of the healthcare system. And what you see on this slide is the entryway when you come as a member of society and want to access your data. It's all digitized. So if I want to, I can read my electronic medical record, for instance. I can get a collation of my health data. I can look up what medicines I have requested from the pharmacy, any lab tests, etc. And it's very, very easy. And also, Denmark is one of the most digitized and digitally able societies in Europe. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also, I think every community wants to make sure that all your members of the community, that you have access to care as close as possible to your home. And this, of course, also is as relevant when you partake in clinical trials. And TrialNation is leading an innovation fund project looking at how we can support decentralized clinical trials implementation. And we do this with Danish life science stakeholders. It's a project which runs from 2022 to 2026 with a significant investment from the Innovation Fund Denmark. And our overall aim is to make clinical research more available for Danish patients and citizens. And this also is very much in concordance with how the healthcare is structured in Denmark, where there is a strong wish also to place these services as close to the patients as possible. And we do this in 3 different aspects. And here we talk about traditional clinical trials, the ones which are approved by the regulatory authorities and the ethics authorities, phase 1 through phase 4. Firstly, we have a national overview of clinical trials, which we are building. And the purpose of this is to make it easier for patients and relatives to find a trial which may be of relevance for them, and also to know who should they contact and make sure that this data is up to date. We do know that, of course, there is information, but usually there is a lag in the status of the information, and we want to make sure that it's up to date. Then we look at it the other way around. How can we identify potential patients who could be invited to a dialogue if they would be interested in participating in a clinical trial? And there we are mapping all the different patient recruitment initiatives that you can use, because we have found that not everybody knows exactly what the opportunities are, including how you can use different overviews and registries. And then in the third part, we also look at, well, how do you then deploy decentralized clinical trials? How do you make sure that you can do it in one way nationally, so that it's very easy both for the sponsors, meaning the pharmaceutical companies, but also the academic sponsors, and also healthcare staff, so that they don't need to think about how to set certain elements up each and every way. So those are the different building blocks in our project. Next slide, please. So with this very short overview, my key messages for you is that there is continuous political support to life science in Denmark. And I think that is one of the key things in success, having a continuous support, because research, it's actually quite slow. I mean, you can get from A to B quick, but in general, it's a long process and you need stability. I think also the second key message is that having excellent public-private collaboration, it does create health, wealth, and knowledge. And you could see the number of clinical trials per capita in Denmark as a testament to an effective public-private collaboration. And thirdly, having an organization gathering clinical trial stakeholders around a shared national agenda is quite impactful. And again, I would like to reiterate that this is also something which has been acknowledged also by the WHO. And I think that in the very recent years, we've seen how crucial it is to be able to very quickly gather around health crises to come to quick solutions. So with that, thank you very much. I think my next slide is if you would like to follow TrialNation on LinkedIn. Most of the publications are in English, some are in Danish, so you can practice your language skills. Not so many in Spanish yet, at least. Thank you.
Doctor Luis, su micrófono.
Muchas gracias, doctora Pilgar, por su excelente
Thank you, Dr.
presentación.
Pilgard, for your excellent presentation. And before you leave, we wanted to give the floor to Dr. Bodje Eliassen for him to make some questions. Go ahead, please, Dr. Bodje.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Marianne. This was an excellent presentation. I understand that you have an ambition that your last slide also should cover Spanish material.
Yes, of course.
So that requires that there will be some activity maybe in these countries and this region. You explained very well that this is a lot about collaboration, but it's also about following what WHO is putting on the table. So what would you advise could be the first step? I mean, we both have countries, so Jorge Lamela, who's here, we have also talked to him in Uruguay, and then we have worked independently or on a different path also with the ORAS countries. So what is the first part to do in order to begin the idea of TrialNation?
I think you need to be very clear on what you want to achieve together to make sure that your scope, that you really agree on the scope and that you have the same understanding of the scope. Not only sort of the wording, but what does it really mean? And I think that is one of the things which has been very successful with TrialNation, with stakeholders coming from very different backgrounds, where some a good overlap in agenda, but not exactly the same agenda, in finding exactly what is it that we want to achieve. And of course, having the commitment to that.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. And I also noticed that you said it has to be fast and streamlined, but still very secure, right? So there is no compromise on the process, just to be clear for everybody.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And of course, I might be a little bit biased in this, but I am mostly interested in the decentralized part, also because if we look at both the Andean countries, but Latin America in general, we have 500 million people using Spanish for health, and there is a huge difference or huge distance. So do you see an opportunity to push this in Latin America?
Absolutely. I think that looking at all the different telehealth solutions and also point of care solutions also for diagnostics and all those things being integrated, it's going to be key when you're a country where the population is really dispersed and the distances are long and perhaps not as easy to travel at all times either. And especially in clinical research where you have requirements to have contacts in some way, it makes life so much easier. And especially when you're a patient, there is a reason that you participate in a clinical trial. So you want to lessen the burden on participation.
Yes. Thank you so much. I know that you need to leave also, so I'm really, really grateful that you could participate today.
Thank you.
And
It
of course,
was my pleasure. Have a successful rest of the meeting.
Thank you so much. And the rest of all the audience, let us make sure that Mariana needs to make Spanish translation for a couple of years from now when we meet next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, doctora Pilger, en nombre del organismo andino de
Thank
salud y
you,
todos los
Dr.
oyentes
Pilger,
que
on behalf of Orasconu.
Hasta
And thank you
pronto.
for
La
joining us
doctora,
today.
Deja a la doctora Kirsten Bokter
Now we
quien
will
va
have
a
Dr.
responder las
Kirsten
consultas que
Butker,
pudieran
who
hacer
will answer to
nuestros
any
presentes.
questions submitted
Seguidamente,
by the audience.
invitamos al doctor
Next,
Peter
we would like to
Nielsen,
invite Mr. or
para
Dr.
abordar
Peter
el
Adel
tema, las
Nielsen,
iniciativas
who will
danesas
address
de ensayos
Danish
clínicos.
initiatives in the case
Le damos
of
la más
clinical
cordial
trials.
bienvenida al
We
doctor
greet
Peter, que es
him,
Senior
Dr. Peter.
Advisor del
He's a
Copenhagen
senior advisor
Institute
of the
Future
Copenhagen
Studies,
Institute for
que es
Future
parte miembro
Studies.
del equipo de
He is
gestión
also a member
ejecutivo de la
of
primera Contract
the
Research Organization
executive
de
management
ensayos
team
clínicos descentralizados de Europa,
of Contract Research
profesor
Organization
visitante y
for the
científico
centralized
en la
clinical
Universidad
trials
de
in Europe,
Nápoles,
visiting professor and
Federico II en
scientist
Italia
at
y
the
en la
University of Naples,
Universidad
Federico
Nacional
II, Italy,
Australiana en
and at the
Canberra,
Australian
Australia.
National University in
Bienvenido, doctor
Canberra,
Adal.
Australia.
Adelante
Welcome,
con su
Dr. Adel.
presentación.
Go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm just waiting for the presentation. Excellent, yes, thank you. And as it says, I'm representing the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. And if you can please go to the next slide. So as Mariana said, life science in Denmark is very important for the society, and approximately 1% of the population is employed in the life science industry. And we have a lot of people employed in the R&D part of life science. And this type of employees, they're very important because they're very good taxpayers. So we benefit a lot from having this industry in the country. That's the reason why we try to make it attractive to the life science industry to go to Denmark and to get settled there, because it's just a very good economical benefit for us. And that's also reflected in the numbers, saying that the life science sector is actually representing around 20% of the Danish exports. We have the pharmaceutical companies and life science companies in general investing a lot in new R&D facilities. So we are really keen to get these companies to Denmark. And it's not only the organizations that needs to be placed there, it's also what they're doing, which we want to attract to Denmark. And that includes clinical trials, because clinical trials, there's definitely also an initiative which is making a surplus for Denmark. So just to give you a number, so we actually try to make it very attractive to submit clinical trial applications to Denmark. And in 2020, we got 362, and I think it's 250 or something like that was actually approved. So what we want to get is that we want to get foreign companies and Danish companies to invest in Denmark and in the expansion of the industry, because that's definitely helping us as a country. So next slide, please. And that's also the reason why we start different initiatives. And one of the first initiative I just want to mention, that's the Trial Nation, which we just heard from Marianne. It has been a tremendous success. It was kind of supported by the Innovation Fund Denmark, which is the largest public foundation in Denmark. But the Innovation Fund Denmark has also contributed to other initiatives like a project called VCT and the Phase 5 project, which I will tell you more about, and also the PACT project, which Marianne also mentioned. So we have a huge investment from the public funds as well, and that's combined with investments from the private sector. So we have these public-private collaborations. So if you can jump to the next slide, please. So the aim is that we want to attract clinical trials to Denmark. And the way we want to do this is that we want to make it smooth to conduct clinical trials. It's just like Marianne said, that if we can streamline the process, then the companies, they will be interested in invest in clinical trials in Denmark. So we need to make it smooth to conduct these clinical trials. And as I said, the reason why we want to do this is that we are actually earning money on it. But it's not only money, it's not only economical benefits, it's also if people or if companies, they're conducting clinical trials in Denmark, then they are also investing in new staff. So we get staff in our hospitals. We get access to new medicines, as Marianne said. We get better quality of care. We get some research into the healthcare system. So attracting clinical trials, that's definitely a priority for us. And that's also the reason why it's mentioned in the different strategies by the government. Next slide, please. So it is very fundamental for Denmark to spot the new trends, because we will never be able to compete on price. Price is, of course, important, but the salaries in Denmark, they're relatively high, and the costs, they are just in general high. So we need to be better in one or another way. We need to be attractive. So a very important thing for the Danish society or the Danish medical society and life science society is that we need to spot the new trends. We need to spot what will the future, what will that be? And of course, virtual clinical trials, decentralized clinical trials, or hybrid, whatever we want to call it, we will use remote data monitoring more and more, and remote data sampling more and more. So that's definitely something which we are very keen to work with. And that's the reason why we have worked, or we have started the Phase 5 study, and also the PACT study, and also the VCT study. So all of them, they are all about decentralization of the clinical trials. And I think what is important also is that it's not only the companies and the life or the healthcare sector, it's also the regulatory authorities which are interested in this. So we kind of sit together with the authorities saying, well, how can we make these new trends being materialized in one another way? And when we were talking about the decentralized clinical trials, then we could see, well, we do not have a legislation which is actually living up to what we want to do. So how can we get some clear guidelines on how can we conduct clinical trials? And that's the reason why Marianne and her team, they were sitting together with the other stakeholders in Denmark and the regulatory authorities, talking with them, asking for some clear guidelines. And that's the reason why we became the first country in the world getting guidelines on decentralized clinical trials, and that's actually those making the fundamentals for the European guidelines. And I know FDA, they have also come up with guidelines. So it's very important for us that we have this collaboration with the authorities and also with the private sector. So the next slide, please. So what we are moving towards is phase 5, because it's not enough just to have everything in theory. We also need to show that we can actually do it. And that's what we wanted to show with the phase 5 study, which is also a study which is funded by the Innovation Fund Denmark, together with private companies. I can mention Novo Nordisk is part of this project, as well as Novartis. Next slide, please. And it's all about making decentralized clinical trials happening. And we wanted to use the new technologies where we can collect data remotely, such that we don't need to see the patients in the hospital each time we want to get some data from them. Because we sincerely believe that the way clinical trials they are done today is not in the favor of the patients, it's in the favor of the researchers and the sponsors. But we need to think about the patients, because the patients, they are actually the most important player here, because they are the ones who are going to help us investigating whether a treatment is okay. Could be a drug, it could be, just a medical device or whatever. But we need the patients. So we need to reduce the barrier for the patients to be able to participate in a clinical trials. Otherwise, we won't get them on board. So that's what we want to do in phase 5. We want to reduce the barrier. And since we can reduce the barrier and the burden on the patient, then we believe that we can start to keep the patients in a study for a longer period of time than they are used to, because they don't need to go to the hospital each time they're going to deliver some data. So that's actually the whole idea. That's the vision, that we can keep patients in clinical studies for a longer period of time. And then if we can make them stay in a study for a longer period of time, then we also start to learn more about the long-term effects of the treatments which we are testing. And we can start to sample much more data. So we also start to know the persona much better. So this is what we want to do. And we do want to show that it's doable. And we want to do this in 3 different indications. So we are working in one study with obesity, another study with diabetic foot ulcer, and then a third one, which is urticaria. Because these are different type of patients which we are dealing with. So next study, please, or next slide, please. So this is just trying to say, well, how do we do it? Well, as I said, we don't want to have the classical way. We want to swap the way we are conducting clinical trials, such that we want to be decentralizing our clinical trials. And it's obvious that this cannot always be done, but we need to do it as much as possible to make it as smooth as possible for the patient to participate. And next slide, please. And as I said, we are conducting 3 different studies. 2 of them are fully virtual, while the last one, that's a hybrid study. And the good thing about doing these decentralized clinical trials is that they are designed for the patients. So the patients, they need to understand that they are the most important. So we are really relying on them. So we do not want to make it a big hassle for them to participate. Otherwise, we will never get patients to participate in the clinical trials. This means that we suddenly, or at least we envision that we will get patients which are going to stay in the study for a longer period of time. We can also, since the patients, they do not need to be at the hospital each time they are delivering data, then we can also get a much larger outreach. So we can get patients which are not living next to a university hospital. We can get people living on the small islands. We can get people who are not going to Copenhagen every day. So that makes it possible for us to get a more heterogeneous patient population, patient population that is actually reflecting the users, and which is very important because that's those who are going to use the treatment when the clinical phases they are over. We can also start to monitor how the patients they are delivering data, are they about to drop out? If they are about to drop out, then we can nudge them to get back into the study. And since we can do the long phase studies, then we can also start to say to catch side effects if they are present. So there are so many benefits with the decentralized clinical trials, and what we want to achieve is a better treatment for more people. So next slide, please. So that's the whole idea behind the phase 5 study. This is just to show you how it is running. So we are doing the recruitment. We do recruitment from various sources, not only from the hospital. We also doing it from the social media. We are using general practitioners and other institutions. Then when the patients they have been recruited, then the medical doctors they do the informed consent with the patients, and then the patients they can start to download an app. So suddenly we have all the clinical trial in the iPhone, and then that's actually where the clinical trial is run. Then they get questionnaires, they get different devices which are connected via the iPhone, and then we can also connect medication. And everything is sampled and stored in databases, and then these databases they are coupled to the Danish registers data, and we can also connect it to the general data from the general practitioners. This means that we suddenly have a large pool of data which is much more descriptive than the data which we have today. And that's something which is going to benefit the patients because they can be used for patients' empowerment. It's better for the sponsors, such that the sponsors they start to know their treatment better. It's also for the healthcare providers, such that they actually can see whether this treatment is benefiting the patients. And then, of course, also in general, just we can get much more research data on it. So next slide, please. So when we were talking or when we were thinking about the phase 5 study, then we saw, well, we can actually start to generate a lot of value for all the different stakeholders. So that's both for the patients, it's for the healthcare providers, it's for the sponsors and the society as a whole. And I think that, or we thought that this is actually the way we are going to sell the concept. That's by seeing where can we generate value for the stakeholders. And we are very much data-driven. So we were making a value matrix for each stakeholder and each activity. And then we suddenly thought, well, it can't be possible that we can generate so much value. So we needed to dig into all the different values, and then we had to think about how can we show that we are generating value, because actually it may be just some thoughts which we have in our mind. We need to show it in practice. So the next slide, please. And in order to show this, then we need to collect the right data. And in order to be able to collect the right data, then we need to have a very good data infrastructure. And this is it's not such that I would go through the data infrastructure, but we just need to be very careful on what kind of data do we actually collect, who has access to the data, such that the patients, they are certain that these will not be shared with people who are not authorized. So we are dealing a lot with the data processing agreements, and it's tough, but it's doable, and that's where it's good we have an organization like Marianne's TriNation, because they can also help with getting these contracts in place. And it's not easy in Europe with GDPR, but as I said, it's doable, and we just need to be careful. So next slide, please. And we need to really go into the patient journey. And I don't want to go through this either, but we are monitoring each step the patient is going through. And this is just for the recruitment and enrollment. We need to ensure that we have the right timestamps such that we can see, is this actually a fast way to recruit patient? Is it faster and better to do a video on demand when we are doing the informed consent part, or is it better with just a video on demand? So there are a lot of things that we need to collect, and we need here also to be sure that the data they are not floating unintentional around. So next slide, please. So this is just to show what it looks like at the end of the day when we are having the clinical trial in a smartphone. So here we have some of screenshots of the smart or of the app. So we have the teleconsultation, we have the booking system. We also have what it looks like when we want to have a WHO5 questionnaire filled in to get the quality of life, and also all the different bits and pieces which the patient sees. So next slide, please. So all in all, everything is built such that it should be easy for the patient to participate. It should be self-empowering for the patients. It should be something which the patient can use. And of course, it should deliver the right data for us. So that's what we are doing now. And I think we will include our first patient first visit on the smartphone in September, late September, or perhaps October. And all three studies, they will have the first patient first visit by November, early November. Next slide, please. Because this has been, so far, it has been very good in Denmark. Despite it's a challenging task we have set ourselves, but it's doable. So the next step is to move it into a Nordic context. Here we start to work with a larger population. It's around 30 million in Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland. And these 30 million people makes it more attractive for clinical or for pharmaceutical companies to conduct clinical trials rather than just having 6 million people in Denmark. Now we can reach out to 30 million. And then we start to be more interested, or we are more a more interesting region for the pharmaceutical company or companies, yeah. And we can also start to say, well, now we can really get these areas which are not very high populated. So we can get those in the very north. They can still participate in a clinical trial, despite they are so far away from a university hospital. And again, we can get continuous data, we can get better data, and we can also offer something for the patients. And that's something I think is very important, that the patient actually get access to an app such that the patient can follow their progress in the disease or how it's going with them. Again, it's all a matter of getting better treatments for more people. So the next slide, please. And that's the reason, oh, that was one too fast or too far. So being able to do this in in the Nordic countries, where we have these very distant areas, makes it, at least to me, makes it obvious that Latin America could be the next place to go, because here we also have these areas which are very dense or low dense populated. So we can give the patients and the citizens access to these apps, which we are making in a clinical context or for a clinical study. We can actually give those apps to the patients and the citizens such that they can be used also for the general practitioners and specialized personnel. And the great thing about Latin America, apart from all the other great things, is that we can reach out to 500 million people. So for us in the phase 5, it would be a fantastic opportunity to be able to try to roll out the phase 5 concept in Latin America. And we have been talking with Uruguay a bit. And I think it's definitely doable. And I think it makes very good sense because, as I said, this will not only be a tool used in the clinical phases, but could also be used as an opportunity for a better contact or improved contact between the physician and the patients. And with that, I will just say thank you for letting me present some of the concepts which we have been using in Denmark, and I think there are a lot of things which we could share, both from Denmark to Latin America, but also from Latin America to Denmark and the Nordic countries. So it would really be interesting. So with that, I think I'll jump to the last slide and just say thank you.
Doctor Bengolea, su micrófono.
Excelente presentación, estimado doctor.
Thank you for your presentation, Doctor. Thank you so much for describing this overview of traditional trials and the new phase 5 trials. It is very important because it represents a greater possibility of reaching a larger population. It is done in real time, as you were saying. It is not a traditional controlled trial, but rather a trial that can be accessed by a greater population, and also it reflects a pharmacological surveillance that is better. Technology allows us to manage large volume of information, and this is important. You also mentioned, when talking about these tools, you said it was necessary to take note of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and this represents a possibility for collaboration. We are very excited. We are many millions here in the Andean region, and we would like to be included in this great database so that we can share information and knowledge. Thank you again, Dr. Nilsson. And now we would like to give the floor to another presentation by Dr. Jorge Lamela. He will address the vision and perception of transplant and critical illness users. He works at the Oncology Observatory in Uruguay, and he is a founder of the Transplant Association of Uruguay, ATUR. Welcome, Dr. Lamela. Go ahead with your presentation.
Muchas gracias, gracias por
Thank
la
you.
invitación.
Thank you so much for
Y
the
mi
invitation.
presentación, más que
And
nada,
my presentation
va a
today
ser esbozando
will
realidad que Uruguay tiene
deal
como
with
la
Uruguay's
tenemos en América
reality,
Latina
which is
y
very similar
un
to the
poco
Latin American
en qué camino
reality,
estamos, que
and
creo que ya estamos
what we are
avanzados
doing
en
currently.
el tema
I
de,
think that we're making progress
de la fase 5, de
in
poder
the phase
ingresar a
5
Uruguay a la
topic,
fase 5.
meaning that
Uruguay
Uruguay
es
could
un
enter
país
this phase.
pequeño,
Uruguay
con
is a
3
small
millones y
country
medio de
with a
habitantes,
population of
que tiene una
3.5 million
realidad,
people,
como muchos, que la investigación clínica
and
no
in
es lo
Uruguay,
que queremos. No
clinical
llegamos a
research
tener
is not
fases
what we
avanzadas.
expect.
No somos un país
We do not
atractivo
reach advanced phases.
para
We are not
los
an
ensayos
attractive
clínicos,
country for
y nosotros
clinical trials.
como organización
And
civil, como
as a
pacientes,
civil
que se ha
organization
nombrado desde el comienzo del
of
webinario,
patients,
el paciente tiene que estar empoderado.
patients need to
El
be
empoderar
empowered,
al
as
paciente
it
quiere
had
decir
been
que
said.
tiene que tener
Empowering the
información,
patient means
tiene
that
que tener
they
ni
have
más
to
ni
be
menos que la
informed.
información de primera mano
They
sobre qué
need to
necesidades
have
hay
the same
en el
amount
país con
of
ciertas enfermedades.
first-hand information, the
Mi
needs
organización
in each
tiene más
country with
de
regard to
20 años.
different
Ahora soy
diseases.
fundador del
My
Observatorio
organization was
Oncológico de
founded 20
Uruguay
years ago.
y
Now I
se nos
work at the
está
Oncology Observatory in
reconociendo
Uruguay,
aquí en este país debido a que
and
juntamos a todas las voces
we are recognized in our
del
country
país
because we
para
are able to
plantear un
join
problema.
the different
Detectamos un
voices in our
problema,
country
el
to
problema
identify a problem.
fue
We
estudiado
detect a
con,
problem. The problem
ya
was
tenemos un año de
analyzed.
trabajo en esto,
We have been
junto con
working
Boyi,
for a year
lo
already
trajimos
with
este año
Boji.
a Boyi, para
We
el tema de fase 5.
had the chance of having Boji
Ministerio de Salud Pública,
here this year for the
quienes
phase
tienen
5
la tarea de traer
clinical
capitales a
trial,
Uruguay, y
and those that
principalmente
have the
los
task
centros de
of
investigación que
attracting
hay en Uruguay,
investment to
para que
Uruguay,
contaran su realidad,
and
para
the
que
research
expusiéramos
centers in
entre
our
todos el
country,
problema.
so that
Uruguay
everybody
tiene
was
un
able
problema,
to express their ideas
que no
on
avanzamos
the problem.
debido a
The
un
problem in
decreto,
Uruguay is that we're not
un
making
decreto
progress
ya
as a
muy,
result
muy,
of
antiguo,
a decree
fuera de
or
la
executive
realidad.
order, which is very
Trajimos a todos
old
los actores,
and is not consistent
planteamos
with
el problema,
our
lo
reality.
detectamos y
We
empezamos a
got
trabajar en
all
una solución.
stakeholders on board.
Creo que todos
We
los países
identified the
que
problem and
tenemos
we
un problema
started
tenemos
to
que
work
primero
in a
las
solution. I
organizaciones
think
de
that
pacientes
when
tenemos que
we have a
detectarlo,
problem, the patient
trabajarlo
organizations need to detect
mancomunadamente con
this
todos
problem
los
and
actores
work together
y llevar
with
la
all
problemática
the
para
different role
una posible
players
solución.
and try to reach
Acuérdense que
a
la voz del
solution.
paciente es la
Let's
voz
remember that
oficial del
the
problema.
voice
¿Por
of
qué? Porque
patients
están
is the
viendo.
official voice of the
En
problem.
uno de los
Why? Because
artículos
they are
que yo
going
expuse,
through it. They are living the problem. In
manifesté
one of the
que
articles
yo,
that I
paciente
wrote,
oncológico,
I said
trasplantado de médula
that
ósea hace 28 años, tuve
me,
la oportunidad
as an
de
oncological
hoy
patient
estar
with a
acá
bone
en
marrow
esta
transplant,
tierra,
I
gracias
have
a
the
que hubieron
chance
ensayos
of
clínicos
being here,
anteriores
of being
que
alive,
pudieron
because there
curar
were
mi enfermedad
previous
o
clinical
cronificarla.
trials
Entonces,
that
eso es lo que yo pido
helped
y lo
me
que pedimos
cure
todas las organizaciones
my
de
disease
pacientes,
or stop
que
it
los que
from
están
becoming
esperando tengan
a
esa
chronic one.
oportunidad.
That is what we ask for,
Recientemente,
that
el
all
2 de
patients have
septiembre,
this same
hicimos
opportunity.
el tercer
On
foro de
September the
investigación
2nd,
clínica.
we held the
Eh,
third
Teníamos
Clinical
planteado
Research
el
Forum.
decreto al Ministerio de Salud Pública
We had
con las
submitted
soluciones
our proposal
tanto
with
a la
regard to
parte
the decree
jurídica,
to the
la parte
authorities with
médica, la
our
parte ética, las
solutions in terms of
universidades, la brevedad,
legal and ethical aspects
y
and medical
trabajamos
aspects
ese
as well.
documento
and we
mejorarlo.
worked on this document to
Esa
improve it.
mejora se tiene que dar
This
para
improvement
poder
needs to
trabar
take
y
place
continuar a las
so
distintas fases.
that we can
América Latina tiene un gran
unhinge
potencial.
the
Y para
mechanism and continue
desarrollar
with the
ese
different
potencial,
or future
tenemos que
phases.
estar
Latin America
unidos,
has a huge potential,
unidos
and we need to be united
para
to
que
be able
los
to
modelos
develop
que hoy, como
this
Dinamarca,
potential.
es un país que
As we
se
see,
destaca en investigación
Denmark
clínica,
stands
se pueda
out
dar
as
esta
a
instancia también
clinical
en
research country,
América Latina.
and we would
Mi
like
mensaje
to be in the same
es,
capacity in Latin
tenemos que
America.
estar unidos.
My message
Este
is that we
contacto
need
que hoy estamos
to
haciendo
work together.
tiene que continuar.
This
Vamos a
contact
invitar
that we're
para el
making
próximo
today
año, en el que
needs to
Boggy
continue.
ya ha intervenido en varios,
Body
lo que
has
llamamos el
participated
simposio
in different
oncolatino,
fora.
donde tratamos
We will
distintos
have
temas de
the
América Latina
Oncological
y
Latin
lo
Symposium
vamos a llevar a cabo
next
en el
year,
2025.
and we would
Por
do
lo
that.
tanto,
We will hold
ahí,
this conference in
ya no
2025,
virtualmente,
and it
creo
will
que
not
vamos a tener
be
una muy buena
remotely
instancia para
held.
ver qué avances hemos tenido,
I
qué
think
hemos
that
podido
this
hacer
will
en
be
nuestro
a
país
great chance
y
to
copiar
see
modelos o
what
llevarlos a una
progress we have
realidad
made and
que
copy
sea
perhaps models
lógica
and
para
take
cada
them
país, según la
to
legislatura de
a
cada país y
reasonable
los
reality
gobernantes de
of
cada
each
país.
country
Tenemos que lograr
in
que el
terms of
tema salud,
legislation
investigación
and public
clínica, en
policy.
este caso,
We need to
sea
accomplish
un
that health
potencial
and clinical
de
research
infraestructura, de
becomes
conocimiento
a
y de
potential
capitales y
opportunity
de
of
soluciones para
knowledge,
los pacientes.
infrastructure, investment,
Lo
and
que tenemos que
solutions
tener
for
claro es
patients.
solución
We
para
need
los
to
pacientes
be
que hoy
clear
están
about
esperando.
this. We need to
No nos
provide
tenemos que
solutions to
olvidar
the
que tenemos
patients that
un
are
gran avance en
waiting
tecnología,
for them.
un gran avance en
There are great
cantidad de
breakthroughs in terms
posibilidades de
of
comunicación.
technology, in
Entonces,
terms of
tenemos que
communication.
aprovechar.
So we need
El
to
mensaje que yo les dejo, debido
take
a la
advantage
experiencia,
of this.
es que la unión
My
hace la
message,
fuerza.
based
Y la
on my
fuerza tiene que
experience,
estar
is that
en la voz de los pacientes.
together we're stronger, and the patients need to be empowered.
Muchas gracias, estimado Jorge Lamela,
Thank you,
por su
Dr. Jorge
exposición, que ha
Lamela,
estado muy clara
for your
en ver
presentation.
el lado del paciente, y hay asociaciones, en
He
este caso en Uruguay, que
has
están
talked from the point
viendo
of
este
view of
tema,
patients,
que
and there are
manifiesta que
organizations
la
in
regulación
Uruguay
es
that are
fundamental para
analyzing
hacer
this.
los
He
cambios
mentioned
necesarios
that
para adaptar la
legislation is of
nuevo
the essence to make the
conocimiento
necessary
al
changes
usuario, al que está
to
siendo
adapt the
afectado. Y
new
creo que ese es un
knowledge
mensaje
to
potente e
the
importante.
users,
Bien,
the affected parties.
seguidamente vamos a
Next,
invitar
we will
a
now
dos
invite
profesionales
two
que trabajan
professionals
precisamente en los institutos
who work
nacionales
in
de salud,
the
tanto de
National
Ecuador
Health Institutes
como de
of
Perú,
Ecuador
quienes
and Peru,
están trabajando el tema de
who
ensayo
are
clínico
working
para darles una
with
perspectiva
clinical trials
nueva
so
a
that
este trabajo de
it is
investigación
possible to
y el
provide a new
desarrollo de esta
perspective
tecnología.
to this research and the
A
development of this
continuación,
technology.
presento a la doctora Doménica de Mora.
I would like
Ella
to
es
introduce you to
investigadora
Dr. Domenica
superior
de Mora. She
del
is a senior
Instituto de Salud
researcher
Pública e
of
Investigación de Ecuador,
INSPI LIP
y
Ecuador,
a doctora Lourdes Carrera,
and Dr.
que es la
Lourdes Carrera,
subdirectora del ensayo
who is the
clínico
Deputy
del
Director
Instituto
of
Nacional de
Clinical
Salud de Perú.
Trials at
En primer momento,
the
entonces,
National
invitamos a la
Health
doctora Doménica
Institute
de
of Peru.
Mora para
We
los
will now give the
comentarios,
floor to
preguntas
Dr.
a los
Domenica
expositores. Adelante,
de Mora
doctora.
for her to provide the necessary comments and questions to the speakers. First of all, I would like to thank the speakers for their excellent presentations from the point of view of technologies and the voice of patients, which is true. I have been a patient myself at some point, and I understand the importance of having these technological or digital tools that can facilitate information to patients faster and anonymously. We're talking about data that will reach my device with a password, and I would be the only person who will see my progress. I wanted to mention that we are the INSPI at Ecuador. We head the network of public and private clinical laboratories. We are responsible for regulating scientific research and the specialized trials that take place in the country. We work with the Ministry of Public Health. We work with the Andean Health Organization, among others, and they have helped us to work with emerging diseases, for example. I believe that the presentations were very interesting. In Ecuador, we're doing something similar in the case of georeferencing of mosquitoes. We're using an app. And citizens have access to this app to indicate or inform if they know about a person that is displaying symptoms. And in this way, we can make the georeferencing and identify the vectors of the disease. And this is led by INSPI. The PAHO and the Ministry of Public Health. I believe that this invitation is very important because we are now witness to different possibilities in terms of technology. We also carry out different investigations, and I wanted to point out or talk about certain research with PAHO. We wanted to develop the batch with the vaccination, the epidemiological data, but we do not have this digital information that can be easily accessed. So this is a very lengthy process with the epidemiological and statistical teams to make this data anonymous, to make sure that no regulations are being violated, because there are strict ethical rules in our country. And through the Public Health Ministry, we have different regulations that guide us for the development of this clinical research. So we take care that the rights and health of patients are not affected. I think that this is very important in terms of vaccination, to be able to work in other studies, to be able to systematize this information in terms of trials and in terms of outcomes. So I believe that it will be very valuable, and I believe that this should be the beginning or an open door so that we can make or have access to this study so that we can implement this study in our country. I find this very interesting. As I mentioned, our country is doing something similar with an app in the case of vectors, but we could perhaps expand this effort for other sectors. So I believe that it is a great opportunity to have technology. So as I was saying, it is a great challenge in our country to carry out this statistical analysis. We spend days, months, weeks with statistical analysis in order to ensure that the information is properly consolidated, and this takes a long time. We also wanted to mention that it would be very important to work with different studies. For instance, we have different centers that work with dengue fever, AIDS, respiratory diseases, non-communicable diseases. We are carrying out research on lead contamination. We see that there is food contamination, which is affecting the public health of the people in our country. So we see this as a very interesting possibility. Thank you for the invitation, and we will draft a report so that we can inform this to our authorities. Your interest in collaborating with our country. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Domenica. I don't know if our speakers would like to mention or comment on what she just said.
Well, maybe I can just mention that of course it's important that all legislations they are that we comply to all legislations, and what we do is that we are always GCP compliant, such that we follow the ICH guidelines, of course, so we don't compromise the patient safety or ethical issues or anything. So of course it should be we must be compliant. So no need to say. And then of course that's because we are running the clinical trial. So we want to do it in a clinical trial format. And the reason why we want to do it in a clinical trial format is that these are very regulated, such that we have very firm procedures. So everything is in SOPs, and we know exactly how to do it. This makes it easier for us to make an app which is possible to use. Then of course our ambition is that it's actually also going to be used as a supplementary for the general practitioners or somewhere else, such that it's actually going to help patients and GPs, physicians, in as a self-empowerment or self-empowering device. And that's of course where we need to work, and we also need to understand how can this be expanded. So what we are doing with the Nordic expansion is that we need to go out and see who wants to join us, and are there any pharmaceutical companies who wants to sponsor this. So that's always the problem which we have. If we're going to develop new things, then we need to get some kind of sponsorship or funding for it. But of course it would be fantastic to try to expand it, because I definitely think this is the way to go, especially in Latin America and the Nordic countries, where we have these very rural areas where we don't have many people, and where it's hard to get to the general practitioner if you feel ill.
Gracias, Dr. Peter. Adelante,
Thank you,
doctora
Dr.
Lourdes
Nielsen.
Carrera.
Go ahead, Dr. Lourdes Carrera, with your
Gracias.
comments.
Buenas
Thank you.
tardes.
Good
Yo
afternoon.
quiero destacar tres fortalezas
I
que se
would
han
like to
señalado
mention
en la primera
three
presentación. La
strengths
primera es
mentioned in the
que
first
existe una
presentation.
política, ¿no?
First of all,
en
there
Dinamarca
is
que
a
está
policy
orientada, ¿no? a la
in
ciencia de la
Denmark
vida, ¿no? Y bajo esta
that is
política
directed
se
to
ha podido
life
implementar
sciences,
lo que es el triángulo
and it
Creo que es la primera fortaleza,
has been
¿no? La
possible
segunda,
to implement
¿no? Es
Trial
el tema
Nation.
de
The second strength
considerar una
is
prioridad la digitalización de la información, ¿no?
prioritizing
Entonces,
the
todos los sistemas de información están
digitalization
digitalizados. Por
of
ejemplo, es
information.
una
All the
dificultad que
information
tenemos
systems
actualmente
are
en Perú, de que
digitized or
al coexistir
digitalized. This is
diferentes
difficulty
sistemas de
we have
salud,
in
cada
Peru,
uno viene
since there are
manejando su
different
propio
health
sistema de
systems in our
información, ¿no?
country.
Entonces,
Each
considero que es un
system
paso
has their own
inicial, ¿no? Que
information
nosotros
system,
podamos
so
también
I believe
tener
that
y llegar a tener
this
un
is a
único sistema de
first step
información
to have
electrónica,
a
¿no? Que de
single
repente más adelante también nos ayude a implementar la fase 5.
electronic information system that will help
Me
us
llamó
to
la
implement
atención
phase
respecto
5.
a esta asociación público-privada. Entiendo
When
que baja
the public-private
del ministerio, ¿no? El
partnership
Ministerio de
was
Dinamarca,
mentioned,
y que la autoridad
it caught my
regulatoria
attention
del
because we have
ensayo
the Ministry of
clínico de
Denmark and
Dinamarca es
the
un componente
regulatory
del Trial Nation. Me
authority
gustaría si me confirme esa
in
información,
Denmark
o en
would
todo
be a
caso, quién es
component
que
of
conduce
Trial Nation,
este Trial
or
Nation. Vi todos los
could you
elementos y
please
los
explain that
integrantes,
to me?
pero
Or
me queda esa duda.
how does
Igual,
Trial Nation
considero
fit
que
in?
este escenario de
I have
asociación
this doubt,
público-privada
and this scenario
es
involving a
ideal
public-private
en contexto de ensayos
association
clínicos, ¿no? Porque
or
nuestros
alliance
stakeholders, o
is
sea, nuestros
ideal
clientes
in
en sí,
this case because our
son
stakeholders
los administradas farmacéuticas, ¿no? Y por otro lado, también
are
rescato la tercera fortaleza de
the
ustedes,
pharmaceutical
de que
companies, and the
la
third
decisión y
strength
todos tienen que estar
is
en
that
torno al paciente, ¿no? Al sujeto de
is a
investigación.
vision that the patient has
Nosotros
to
creo
be
que
at the
propugnamos
center
como
of the
parte de las
research.
iniciativas de Orascom,
We
¿no? De OPS,
promote as
que
part
tenemos que tener
of
modelos
PAHO
de
and
salud
Orascom
basados,
initiatives
¿no?
that we
Centrados
need
en
to
el
have
paciente, en el sujeto,
health
¿no? Pero
models
implementarlos, ¿no? Por
that
eso es teórico, al menos a nivel
focus on
del
the
país, todavía estamos
patient.
en ese
And
proceso,
at
¿no?
a country
Pero sí
level,
desde
we
la
are
agencia
still
regulatoria,
in the
¿no? Estamos
process
al
of
menos
achieving
todas
this.
las acciones que
From
estamos
the point of view of the
implementando
regulatory
ahora,
agency, we
siempre
are
teniendo el centro de investigación
implementing
como objetivo, ¿no?
actions
Velar por su seguridad. Y creo que
focusing on the
bajo
safety
ello es
of
que todos los
the patient.
stakeholders, como ustedes lo han hecho,
And
se pueden organizar. Lo que sí hemos
in this
mejorado
connection,
bastante
the
en en
stakeholders
este último año
can be
es la
organized.
comunicación y coordinación que se tienen con las
We have a better
farmacéuticas, ¿no?
communication
Justamente porque
and
los dos
coordination with the
tenemos el mismo
pharmaceutical
objetivo,
companies
¿no?
this year
Que
because
es,
we have the
uno, ¿no?
same
Primero,
objective.
garantizar que sean
The
ensayos
first one
clínicos
is to
con las mejores buenas prácticas clínicas, ¿no? del
guarantee
país. Y lo otro también
best
que
clinical
los pacientes puedan
practices
tener
in
acceso a estos
Peru,
tratamientos
and
de
that
enfermedades
patients
oncológicas o
can have
enfermedades
access
huérfanas
to
que no pueden tener acceso por
oncological
un servicio de
diseases,
salud usualmente, ¿no?
which they cannot
Y bajo
access
ello,
through
también
a
me parece
regular
importante
health
que
service.
esta Trial
And
Nation, ¿no?
I
hace
believe
énfasis en que manejan una
that
red,
it was important
una red
to
legal, ¿no?
listen
O sea,
that
supongo que han
Trial
armado, ¿no? todo
Nation
un tema de
has a
normativas, de
legal
contratos
network.
que
I
establecen
imagine
con esta
that
parte
they have been
público-privada,
able
¿no?
to
Para establecer esa asociación
gather
público-privada,
this
para que puedan
legal
también tener las
information
reglas, ¿no? O sea, la
bank
idea es que
that they
siempre
can
el
share with
beneficio,
the
¿no? Lo tenga
private
el
sector
sujeto de investigación, ¿no? Que no tampoco
so
se pueda
that the rules are clear
tergiversar
for everybody,
o
that
dañar de
the
alguna forma, ¿no? Este tema, esta
patient
asociación
is
público-privada
protected
favorecer de
against
repente a la
any
farmacéutica y
kind
no
of
a la entidad pública, ¿no? Eso
violation.
también me parece importante cómo
I
cuidan
believe
esto.
that
Esa sería mi segunda
the
pregunta.
care
Y
that
respecto a la fase
they
5,
display is very important. And with regard to
ahí
phase
definitivamente el
5,
elemento principal es que tengan el sistema único de
the
información,
main element
que
there
pueda
is to
tener,
have
supongo
the
que la
single
clínica
information
electrónica
system.
está
I
implementada también
believe that
en los
the
establecimientos, en los
electronic
centros que se
information
encuentran
system
de forma
is
remota, en el
implemented
caso de Dinamarca,
in
¿no?
remote
Un problema que
areas,
todavía no tenemos
as in the case
nosotros.
of Denmark.
Y lo otro
This
que
is a
me queda la
problem
duda
that
es
we
cómo esta
have
fase
in Peru.
5, cómo
And
se
I have a doubt
financia, ¿no?
here.
Cómo se
How
financia
is phase 5
la implementación,
funded?
¿no? Estos estudios fase 5,
These
si va por
phase
el tema también
5
público,
studies
por el privado, o
are
es un mixto,
funded
¿no? Y
in
cómo
what
se
way?
hace,
Is it
cómo tienen acceso
a
los pacientes,
public
¿no? Porque
and
al menos en la
private
imagen se veía que ustedes a través de
collaboration?
las redes sociales hacen la convocatoria, ¿no? Que supongo que
I
es a nivel
saw through
nacional,
the
pero
presentation
también quiero
that
saber
you
cuáles eran los
use social
requisitos, había
media,
una cuota por cada
and
región, ¿no?
probably I would like
¿Cómo
to
era
know
ello?
about the
Esos
different
serían mis principales
proportions,
comentarios y preguntas.
each portion in terms of
Muy amable,
region,
doctora
for instance.
Carrera, y
Those were my
abrimos
comments.
también para las respuestas.
Thank you,
Adelante.
Dr.
Creo que hicieron
Carrera.
mención de Trial Nation.
And now we would
Nation.
like to hear to
Doctora
the
Kristen,
answers.
adelante.
Dr. Kristen,
La
go
primera
ahead,
respuesta.
please, with the first answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. There was a lot of questions, so I hope please help me to remember all of them. The first one is TriNation is an initiative for Denmark. So I think we can bring into you the way that we are structured and our history. I mean, the way we are built up has taken many years. We are not able to do what we do today just by one day or 1 year. So to be honest, it is built up during many years. And of course, we are started on a structure that was in one another way started years back. So just to be honest, it takes time to build up a structure like we have, even though we are a small country compared to your countries. So it do take time. And what we can offer to you is that we can tell about how we are organized and our journey, so you can be inspired. So I think and Peter and his team might be able to do something more directly in your countries, but I think Peter can explain that in that way. And I don't know if your questions was about funding. Was that also funding in TriNation, or was it primarily in phase 5?
No, no. La segunda pregunta
The second question
era relacionada a cómo esta
was
red legal, ¿no?
in
El tema
respect
de
of how
mantener el
this
vínculo
legal
público-privado,
network,
cómo
how
hacer
this
siempre
public-private link
al público.
is maintained to
O en todo
favor
caso, ¿no?
the
Genera
patient,
beneficio tanto para el privado.
or how benefits are generated.
Yeah, our hospitals are owned by 5 regions. So Denmark are divided into 5 regions, and the regions owns the hospitals, and they are all public. And in each of the regions, they are legal entities. So if you have a clinical trial and you will need to make a contract, an agreement, you will need to go into each of the 5 regions and make an agreement. But to make it more smooth and easier and quicker, we have gathered legal advisors from each of the 5 regions. They are meeting each other every second week, and they are developing templates that the companies can use. And when they sit together and they agree that this template they have developed can be used in all 5 regions. So for the companies, it's much easier and quicker to have a contract in relation to a clinical trial approved. They can use these templates. We have templates that can be found on our homepage and just used as they are. If the companies do not make any changes to them, we can usually have a contract approved in Denmark within 5 working days, and that is very, very quickly. Then, of course, they need to negotiate the budget. So that goes beyond this contract. And then the companies, quite often, they come to us and they say, well, we can see you have a template, but we cannot use your template as it is because we have, as a company, special requirements. And then the company can go into this legal network and they can make their own templates. So it's possible for the companies to negotiate their own contract templates that are able to be used in the same way, so it can be approved within 5 working days. And because the legal network, the legal advisors, they are employed by the regions who owns the hospitals, so they really work, and they only make contracts that protect the hospital and the patient, of course, and especially the patient's data. So how the data can be used, how it can be transferred, and also the samples that are being used in a clinical trial. So the contract really try to protect the patient, and in the same way make it possible for the company to use the data that they are looking for. Is that the what you were asking for? Okay.
Sí, gracias, sí.
Thank you.
Sí, muchas
Yes.
gracias.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a full
Muchas
answer.
gracias. Si alguien quiere ingresar de los panelistas a ver la consulta sobre
If
la
any
fase
of the speakers would like to answer the question about phase 5 made by Dr. Carrera.
Yeah, I can try to answer this regarding the funding. So we need to comply to the EU rules, so we can't get any fully funding by the foundation. As long when it's a public foundation, then they are not allowed to give us 100% funding. I think in the phase 5 project, we have received approximately 50% of the project budget that's funded by the public foundation, and then we have private partners who are funding the rest. And these private partners, that's Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, we do have our own funding, and then Novo and Novartis, they are also players in the phase 5 project, so they are also having some self-financing. We have the company which is building the app platform, the app. They are also doing some funding. So it is a public-private. We also have university hospitals, and the university sees they are also part of it. They are also contributing. Still, it's a pretty low self-financing they have, but we need to comply to the EU state rules. So it's important for us that we have these private companies who can support the project. And in the case of the Urticaria, then it's Novartis, and they are actually it's their property. The app which is developed, that's the property of Novartis, and likewise the app for obesity, that's Novo Nordisk property. So that's how it's done today. The diabetic foot ulcer, that's actually, I don't know who. I reckon it will be the municipality who will have the app, but it also needs to be supported if they need to use it in the future. And it's the good idea, we think, is that when the project period is over, so now we say it's running for 1 year, then the app owner can decide themselves whether they want to continue the trial. If they want to continue for another year, then they should pay for another year, such that they can start. Then they suddenly can start to collect many data over many years, as long as they want to. So that's the whole concept. So it is important that that the user will pay. But we hope that that it will have such a huge impact or such a benefit for the patients, such that it also could be the public which is funding the app and running the app in the future. And then you had a question regarding something about the social media recruitment via social media, but I can't remember the question regarding that.
Sí, era más cómo decidían
It
qué
was
región
about how you decided
captar los sujetos de investigación, ¿no?
how
Asumo que como
to
tienen una base de datos de
attract
toda la población
the
y también
subjects
ven
of the investigation. I
condiciones
imagine
clínicas
that there
que tienen
is a
estos
database for the
pacientes,
population where you're
ustedes
able to
pueden ir
examine the
viendo, ¿no? el
clinical
porcentaje, ¿no?
conditions of
región
these
con más
patients.
prevalencia de
You're
esta
able
condición
to see
y de
which
repente
is
dirigir, ¿no?
the region
la
with
red
the
o la
highest
campaña, ¿no? de
prevalence
reclutamiento
and
hacia ellos.
probably
O
focus
tienen
the
otra forma de
recruitment
decisión.
campaign towards them. What is the mechanism that you
Otra
use?
forma de generar,
Is
o
there
sea, decidir
another
en esta
way
región
of
voy a reclutar.
deciding in this region I am going to launch the recruitment campaign?
So we don't differentiate. So just to say, we haven't recruited the first patient yet, but we don't envision that we'll have differentiated campaigns. So we will do different advertisements on the social media, and then we'll see how it goes. And then we also involve some specialized clinics, make them aware, have flyers in the clinics that these studies, they are ongoing. But actually it is a relatively we can do it in many different ways, and I've also been in another study where we were also doing online recruitment, and then there was a dermatological disease where we had dermatologists assessing the photos online, and that was actually very successful. But we also saw that we needed to adapt the campaign which we were running towards more towards a certain persona on the internet. So it is a very flexible way you can do it. But for the time being, we just have one campaign for each of the studies, and then we'll see how it goes. So we are recruiting around 200 patients in each of the 3 studies. The diabetic foot ulcer, that'll be on the clinic. So that's face-to-face. I don't know if that gave the answer.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you.
Muchas gracias a nuestros comentaristas.
Thank you so
por
much
las tan
for the
interesantes
comments.
preguntas.
Thank
Ha
you
llegado
for your
del
interesting
público
questions.
un gran grupo de preguntas
We
y
have
solamente haremos
received a
algunas
large
que
number
vamos
of questions from the
complementar,
public. We're going to select
eh,
some of them.
citando varias de ellas. Una de ellas dice,
One of the questions is,
¿qué estrategias
which
ha
strategies
utilizado para asegurar la
have been used
participación y
to
retención
ensure
de los
the
pacientes
participation and
estudios
retention
de
of
fase 5?
patients in phase 5
Y
studies?
se complementa con
And
cómo
there is
manejan
another question.
la recopilación y
How do
análisis de
you
datos
manage the
en
compilation
estudios
and
de la
analysis of
fase
data
5,
in phase
especialmente
5
en
studies,
entornos
especially
descentralizados?
in
Adelante.
decentralized environments or settings? Your answers, please.
So the first was retention strategies. So as I said, we have not recruited the first patient yet, but we have some ideas on how we want to do the retention. So we have different strategies. One of the strategies is that if we start to see that people, they are not responding to the questionnaires, then they'll get some warnings online. So that we can do automatically. So if the questionnaires, they're delayed, and if we see that it's more and more seldom that they are online, then we can also start to ask if they have any troubles. So what we've done previously is that we've been in the other studies, which decentralized clinical trial studies, which I've been part of, is that we have been looking at how they was responding, the patients, and if they start to be delayed, or if they do not deliver the data as they wanted, then we can text them and ask if there is any problem, and sometimes it's just simple tweaks in order to get them on board again. And the way we try to keep them is also by providing some material. So trying to give them some info regarding the disease they are having. So we are trying really to give the patient something back, but we are not allowed to give any sort of a gift or anything. So it's more, we can only give information back to the patients. So that's how the ethical rules they are. We can't give them anything but information, and so that's how we are working with making them stay in the project. But it is of course something which we are trying to monitoring. How can we deal with the patients that are about to drop out? Because that's a huge source for irritation, because it is so annoying when people they're dropping out. Then we need to find new people, and it takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. Then it was the analysis. Yes, the analysis, we haven't done that yet, but we are of course sampling all the data, and we can't start analyzing the data until we have finished the project. So we'll see how that's done, but I don't see this as a problem. Maybe I've misunderstood the problem or the question.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank
Está
you
relacionada, sí,
so
la
much.
respuesta
Yes,
a la
your
preocupación
answer
de
is
para
related
conocer
to
cómo
your
retener a los
concern
pacientes,
about
cómo captan
the
la
ways to
información,
retain
cómo
the
la
patients,
procesan,
how
hacen el
to
análisis
collect
de datos
information, how you
en los estudios de
process it,
grabación,
how you
y
carry out
especialmente la idea era
the
conocer también
data
en
processing
entornos
in phase 5
descentralizados
studies. And the other
cómo
question
manejan
was
esta
related
información
to the
y
decentralized settings,
se ha
how you
completado la
manage this
respuesta.
information
Y finalmente
in that case. But
una
the answer
consulta,
was
tenemos todavía
complete.
varias, pero
We
respetamos mucho también el
have
tiempo.
many other questions,
Y
but we are very
la
respectful
última pregunta
of
es cómo manejan los
time.
grandes volúmenes
And the other
de
question is how
información
you
luego
manage
de
the
captar
large
la
volumes of
data en los
information
pacientes.
after you
¿Qué
collect information from the
herramientas
patients.
utilizan? ¿Qué
Which
instrumentos utilizan? ¿Y qué
tools
resultados ha dado?
or instruments
Adelante.
do you use, and what have been the outcomes?
So far we haven't we haven't finished the phase 5, so we have not started analyzing the data. But I've been used to use a software like ours, so we are collecting all the data, and then we are using different software and analytical tools to analyze the data. But of course, it's now we're only talking about the patient-facing material or patient-facing part. We also have the back end where the clinicians, they can oversee the patient, and that's of course also very important that we need to have an easy tool for the clinicians to be able to oversee the patients. So if there are some issues, then we are kind of using this traffic light. Here we have a patient which we need to contact, or here we have a patient who is not delivering the data. So we really need to have an easy or at least a backend or a clinician backend where the clinician can oversee a lot of patients easily, and that's usually done by these traffic lights. And that's the way we ensure that things they are delivered in time, and where we start to see this patient is perhaps about to drop out.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so
Bien, hemos
much.
llegado al tiempo final de nuestra reunión.
We have reached the end of our webinar.
Nuestros grandes panelistas que nos han
We
dado
would
una
like to
idea
thank
de
our
un
excellent
magnífico
speakers
estudio,
for their
moderno,
excellent
que está dando
presentations on
resultados,
modern
que puede, tiene la
studies
posibilidad de
that are
aplicarse en
yielding
nuestros países,
results,
que
a model that
indudablemente
can
es un
be
proceso que va a
implemented in
demorar,
our
pero
countries.
sin embargo hay
It
mucho
is
interés
surely
poder
a
brindar
very
a nuestra
lengthy
población
process.
instrumentos,
Nevertheless,
soluciones a la problemática que
it
tenemos.
can provide
Un profundo
several
agradecimiento al
solutions to
doctor
our
Yacén, a la
population's
doctora Mariel Pilgar, al doctor
problems.
Peter Audal,
Thanks to all our
por
speakers
su gran participación.
for
También
their
al doctor
great
Jorge
participation.
Lamela y
Dr. Marion
las
Pilgard,
palabras de la
Dr.
doctora
Peter
Kirsten
Nielsen,
Botker,
Dr. Jorge Lamela,
que nos han
and
acompañado desde
the
diferentes
participation
partes
of Dr.
del
Kirsten
mundo, en
Botker,
este caso Dinamarca,
who
Uruguay.
have joined us from
También
different
un
parts of the
agradecimiento
world today,
profundo a
Uruguay
nuestras
and Denmark.
comentaristas
We would
que
like to thank
muy gratamente han estado presentes,
our commentators
brindándonos también
for their
participación y comentarios
presence and
con
comments
respecto a la dinámica
with
del
regard
ensayo clínico en cada uno de
to
los países.
clinical
A la doctora
trials in
Doménica de
each
Mora del
of
INSPI
their
y a
countries.
la
I'm
doctora
talking
Lourdes
about
Carrera del
Dr. Domenica
INSPI
de Mora from the INSPI and Lourdes Carrera
Eh,
from
Finalmente,
the
quiero
INS in
darle
Peru.
la palabra a
I
la
would
doctora
like to give the floor
Marisela Malqui
to
Osorio
Dr.
para el
Marisela
cierre de
Malqui
nuestro evento.
for
Adelante,
the
doctora Marisela.
closing
Lucho,
remarks. Go
por
ahead,
favor, creo que
Dr.
antes
Marisela.
invitamos al doctor Boya para unas palabras
First,
también
I would
sobre
like
el
to
coorganizador.
give the floor to Dr.
Bien,
Boya
adelante, doctora.
Gracias,
because
muchas
he's a
gracias.
co-organizer.
Y,
Thank
y
you.
muchas gracias por ese evento, esas 2 horas.
Thank you for
Creo
this
que hemos escuchado
webinar.
que hay muchas
I think
oportunidades,
that
pero
we
también
have heard
trabajo
that
duro
there are
para
many
realizarlo. Y
opportunities and
así
hard
es,
work.
que es bueno, también
So
necesita trabajo.
this is good.
Me alegra mucho
I
escuchar
am
también
very
de los
happy
2 expertos de América
to
Latina
listen
y
what
las
the 2
preguntas
Latin
también.
American
Y puede a veces
experts
sonar que
said.
es muy complejo y sí que se puede hacer en los países nórdicos
Sometimes
y
it
va a ser
seems
muy
that it
difícil
is
trasladar eso
very
para los
complex
países de
and
América
that it
Latina.
would be
Pero yo
difficult to
conozco esa
transfer the
región muy
Nordic
bien.
experience to Latin America, but I
Viví
know
en
this
Brasil
region
en
very
los
well. I
90s hace
lived
muchos años.
in Brazil during the 90s, many
Y
years
después he
ago,
estado bastante en
and
Perú.
then I
Y
have
cuando
been in
algo se
Peru
ve
for a long
imposible,
while,
la
and
solución
I can
es
say
hacer
that
los pedazos
when
posibles.
something seems impossible, the solution is
Entonces,
to divide what
determinar
is
si dónde
impossible
empezamos, pero más
in
importante, ¿qué
small
es que queremos
tasks.
lograr?
We
Y
need
cuando
to
tenemos ese
consider
fin en
where we
mente,
are and
es
identify
posible,
what
pero
we
como fue dicho
need
para
to
varios y de
achieve.
todos,
When we know
necesitamos
that,
trabajar juntos. La primera
we
parte es juntarse
are able to
y
move forward
identificar dónde
together.
es
The
que queremos
first
llegar.
step is
Y
to
ahí se puede tomarlo pedazo por pedazo.
gather together and identify what we need, and then we can make this task division. We are ready to collaborate with you. We have heard that Trial Nation is also ready to provide support with their advice and recommendations. I believe that there are many opportunities in Latin America.
PAO,
There are different
hay
opportunities
bastantes
through the
también
World
son
Bank,
capaces de
the IDB,
apoyarse.
and
Hay la
PAO.
organización
There are different
en el
institutions that
país
can
o
provide
entre los
support.
países.
There
Y
are
ahí lo pongo en dos
inter-country
manos
organizations
de
and
horas,
national
como
organizations.
tienen 6 países,
And
que se
in this
podría también
connection,
pensar
I
juntos
would
en esta forma.
suggest
Y
that
como hemos trabajado
ORAS
con horas
CONU,
también
that
con
includes
la
6
idea de
countries,
cómo
could
trabajar en
think
esos
about a
países con
solution.
herramientas digitales, sabemos
We
que ya
could
hay un proceso en esto. Y
continue
también que hemos
with
trabajado
our joint
con
work in the
Perfin
case of digital
en Uruguay.
tools.
También
We
nos
have
muestra
also
que
worked in
hay
Uruguay, and
capacidad,
this
hay voluntad,
reveals
y ahora
that
es para
there
empujar y
is
juntar las fuerzas en esto.
a will and the
Agradezco
right
mucho el tiempo
capabilities
de
to move
todos
forward.
ustedes que han
I would
escuchado
like to thank
y
you
mandado
for
sus
your time
preguntas. Y
today.
claro que
Thank you for your
ustedes que han
questions,
sido participantes en el panel
and
y han
thank you
presentado.
to the
Muchas gracias
panelists
y
and the speakers.
vamos
Thank
a
you.
América Latina.
And let's go. Let's move forward, Latin
Muchas
America.
gracias, doctora
Thank
Elia
you.
Sein, por sus palabras finales. Adelante, doctora Marisela Malqui, para el
Dr.
cierre.
Boja,
Gracias,
now
Lucho.
your final
Bueno,
words, Marisela Malqui.
reiterar nuestro agradecimiento a
I
cada
would
uno de
like to
nuestros
reiterate
estudiantes ponentes,
our
al mostrarlos una nueva posibilidad de
thanks to
trabajo
the
en el
speakers
campo de
because they
la salud.
have shown
Vemos un
us
poco como
another
lluvia
work
cómo en
possibility
Dinamarca, pues, ¿no? Ya
in
tienen
the health
todos
area.
los datos
We
saberes
are
sociales digitalizados
slightly
desde el año 68, pues, ¿no? Y
envious
que van desde el
when we
nacimiento y todo el
hear
curso de
what's
vida
going on in
de su
Denmark
población y
with
que,
the
como lo mencionaron,
digitalization
es
of
importante, es un pilar importantísimo tener la
data
información para la toma
from
de
birth
decisiones.
to grave. It is a very important
Pero
pillar for
también,
decision
como se ha dicho,
making.
es mirar
But as it
cómo
has
se
been
avanzó
said,
y nosotros en este lado del
it is
mundo
important
también
to
avanzar. Tenemos avances, ya lo
see
han
the
mostrado, lo
progress
han
made.
mencionado nuestros
And in
colegas,
this part of the
pero
world, I
todavía
can say
relativamente
that
no
we have made
articulados
progress,
y ese creo que debe
but
ser y es el
probably
valor
we
agregado
need
que queremos
more
conseguir
articulation,
desde
and
Horas Conu,
probably
que,
there
como ya conocen, tenemos
lies
a 6
what we
países, está
want
Bolivia,
to
Chile,
achieve through
Colombia,
Orozcono.
Ecuador, Perú y
We have
Venezuela, que
Bolivia,
que
Chile,
hacen casi
Colombia,
un
Peru, and
170
Venezuela.
millones de
We're talking
habitantes.
about almost 170
Y
million
en salud,
people
definitivamente
living in
queremos
these countries, and in the health sector,
proveer las mejores
we want to
herramientas, los mejores
provide the best
medicamentos,
tools,
los
the
mejores
best
insumos, las
drugs,
mejores
the
tecnologías,
best
porque ese es
supplies,
el
and the
fin de
best
la,
technologies, because
el
this
objetivo
is
principal
the
del Horas Conu, es
main
contribuir a la mejora
objective
de la
of
salud de su
Oras
población.
Ono,
6 millones
contributing to an
equivale a
improvement of the
disminuyendo las
population's
desigualdades que
health,
lamentablemente pues existen
to
y
try to
conocemos,
reduce
¿no?
the
Saludamos pues que en
inequalities
Dinamarca hay una
that
cobertura
exist.
universal basada en
We are happy
impuestos y que
to
eso
hear that
garantiza a
there
toda su
is
población
a
la posibilidad
universal
de tener
coverage
también una mejor
in
cobertura en el lado del
Denmark,
acceso, ¿no?
which is
Y
tax-based,
esta
and
decisión
which
de priorizar en tener una
promotes
política de
access to
tiempos
health,
de la vida
and
que hace pues
also
que
the
se
prioritization of
tenga este
life
campo muy
sciences,
desarrollado en cuanto
which
a investigar, ¿no? La doctora
helps
Calle,
to
la
further
secretaria general,
develop
siempre nos menciona,
research in this
promovamos las
field.
3 I, ¿no?
Dr.
Es la
Kaye always mentions
innovación,
the
la
3 I's:
investigación y la
innovation,
administración
investigation or research,
y parte de esto es pues trabajar en estos ensayos
and implementation. And part of
clínicos
this
que
is
son un tipo
to
de investigación
work
que
in the
van a
clinical
dar posibilidades de nuevos
trials
medicamentos, de nuevas
that
vacunas
will
para
lead to new
enfermedades
drugs
que
and
pueden
vaccines
tenerse y
to
sobre todo
fight
las de alto costo,
diseases,
las oncológicas, las
especially
enfermedades
the
raras
oncological
y
ones
huérfanas, ¿no? Que a veces
and the rare diseases which are difficult to treat. And this close collaboration is also very important. We have heard about the clear rules that help public and private collaboration have progress. And we see this in different areas in our countries as well. And in the case of the phase 5 of clinical studies, that we have to take advantage of the technologies and all our effort with BOJA in the case of digital health. And we need to take the first step to move forward. Any big problem is an opportunity, and we know that we can count on your experience so that we can benefit from the lessons learned and everything that you have achieved. The focus on the research subject is extremely important. These are times when we can conduct remote follow-up. The patient doesn't need to go all the way to the hospital. The idea is to facilitate things for the citizen, the patient, the research subject. And this is necessary. I believe that you have carried out trials in the case of urticaria, diabetes, and obesity. And I believe that this is the beginning of other studies. I would like to reiterate that Orasconu creates these spaces to share knowledge and experience so that we can move forward in the health area. Health is extremely important for the progress of any society or country. We reiterate our thanks, and I believe that we will communicate to treat or to handle these topics in other settings. Thank you, BOJA, for being committed to this topic and this webinar series that we have started. We are going to continue on a monthly basis. Orasconu carries out these events on a weekly basis, and we take the opportunity to invite you to the next webinar that will take place on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Peruvian time. The topic is acting with our heart. Let's stop cardiovascular diseases. We invite you to this webinar. I would like to thank each one of you. I would like to thank the speakers, the members of the Orasconu team. Thank you so much, and see you soon.